Hello, guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 113. I can't believe there's been so many, but we're doing part 113 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights. We take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got a very interesting assortment. We've got a couple reptiles, a bird and a few mammals, but we've got some interesting mammals plus some new ones, always a good healthy mix of animals in our Planet Zoo mod spotlight. So we're going to be starting off today with the monitors. We're going to be starting off today with a lesser known species of monitor lizard. We have got the, I know it's floating a bit, but we've got the Mertens water monitor that gives us a good look at these guys. So the Mertens water monitor, these guys are a monitor lizard very closely related to many other species of monitor lizards like Komodo dragons, lace monitors, those guys. And these guys are typically found in coastal and inland waters across northern Australia. So they can be found from the Kimberley in Western Australia up through that area to the western side up in Cape York, which is in far north Queensland. So that funny, sticky out bit that everyone loves about Australia, and that's Queensland, that bit up there, that's where they can also be found. So these guys, as I mentioned, they're called the Mertens water monitor. So these guys were originally named after the German herpetologist Robert Mertens, which probably studied these guys a lot. So, and they get their name water monitor because they love hanging around water. So these are a very interesting animal. These guys grow to a total length, including their tail, so not snout to vent length. These guys get about a meter long, or about 33 feet, and you can see they're dark brown to olive above with these creamy spots and things like that. And you can see their underside's quite a bit paler, very much more yellowish and white. And they have this grey mottling across their neck and blue-grey bars along their chest. And their tail, as you can see, is strongly compressed laterally. That means they're pretty flat on their side there, you can see. This gives them a bit of a keel to help them swim a little better, so almost like the tail of an eel, but not quite as sophisticated, but really helps them. And this is about 1.5 times the length of their head and body, so they've got quite a long tail compared to their body and things like that, which is quite interesting. In terms of their behavior, these guys, as mentioned, they're semi-aquatic, so they're quite strong swimmers, and they're seldom found quite far from water, and they're often seen basking on rocks and branches overhanging swamp lagoons and rocks and things, and all throughout their range. And when they're disturbed, they'll often just jump into the water, and they'll actually stay submerged for long periods to escape from predators. In terms of feeding, these guys will feed on pretty much they're on that seafood diet like most monitors are, so they feed on whatever they can find. Pretty much they can be found, find fish, frogs, crabs, crayfish, shrimps, amphipods, and also carrion that can be found in the water. But they'll also take terrestrial vertebrates such as insects, spiders, even human rubbish they'll eat. Terrestrial vertebrates like small mammals, small reptiles, things like that. So they're mentioned on their seafood diet. They also have quite a good sense of smell that allows them to dig for prey if they even can smell it. And they'll often eat eggs of many species of freshwater turtles. So that's also quite interesting. So we'll have a look at the baby, then we'll talk about their breeding. So let's find the babies. There's got to be a baby here. There he is. Little cutie. So these little Mertens monitors, they typically lay their eggs in a burrow, usually with the egg laying taking place kind of early in the dry season, and they hatch in the following wet season. So the eggs will hatch within 200 to 300 days of laying. It depends on the temperature though, and these hatchlings will enter the water and swim away immediately, so they're just basically ready to go right after they hatch. And in terms of conservation, they have a very interesting conservation story because they're not really impacted. They're not like the same species we talk about, habitat loss, things like that. Their habitat's relatively fine, but these species are quite susceptible to the spread of cane toads. So cane toads are a South American type of frog, and they were introduced into Australia as a kind of pest control, but they've really had an impact as they've spread to native wildlife because they're not used to these guys, because cane toads actually are quite poisonous, and even if your dog licks them, they can die, but many of the animals that are kind of adapted to feed on amphibians, they don't know this, so they're naive to this, and then they die because they get poisoned. But that's a big thing that's affecting the monitors, because the monitor eats the Mertens water monitor eats the cane toad and then dies from the poison. So that is why they are considered vulnerable or even endangered by some respects, and that's why they're kind of worried about these guys. But other than that, invasive species, they're pretty much doing okay. So that's really, really cool. Not too bad in that respect. It's just I think it's a more interesting conservation stories talking about how invasive species can really hurt animals. But yep, there we've got the Mertens water monitor, quite a good animal. So this was done by Leaf Jen and your old friend TNT. Really made a nice one here. There's also a port from Zoo Tycoon 3, I think it was, the original Frontier one. But that's quite interesting. So next up, we've got another monitor. So you guys better watch this. This next one was done by Leaf and Scott. So Scott's done a few amphibians, not amphibians, reptiles before. But yeah, really, really nice one here. Is this adult? Yep. So this is a sand goanna. So these guys are a species of large Australian monitor lizards, quite a bit bigger than your lace monitors, or I mean, not lace monitors, Mertens water monitors. They're also known as the sand monitor, or just sand goanna, or Gold's monitor, and also known as the racehorse goanna, that they share that name with another species that we'll talk about next time. So these guys are a species of Varanus, so they're a type of monitor and goanna. They are found in quite a variety of habitats, and they were thought to be a couple different species, but now they've been described and things like that. So now you kind of have your Gold's monitor and your desert sand monitor, which are the two different subspecies. But yeah, in terms of their biology, these guys are a terrestrial reptile, and they excavate large burrows for shelter, and also they use tree hollows and rock, like holes in rocks to use for shelter. They inhabit quite a large range within Australia. They can be found pretty much everywhere except like the peninsula and some particular places down south where it's too cold for them. So they're quite wide-ranging across Australia. And they reach an average length of about 1.4 meters, or about 4'6", and they can weigh as much as 6 kilograms, so it's quite big. And they can be found to northern and eastern Australia, where they live in woodlands and grasslands. And the smaller subspecies, which is the desert sand monitor, they live in the interior of Australia, but their ranges do overlap with like the Argus monitor and the Gold's monitor, which is the other subspecies. And the similarity between these subspecies and their closest within their range can often confuse people to which is which when they try to identify them. So very similar to other species of monitors, these guys are quite voracious foragers. So these guys are diurnal, which means they basically hang out and hunt for food most of the time during the day. And pretty much anything smaller than themselves is going to get eaten. So that's most monitors. So their diets include the hatchlings and juveniles of many animals. It includes insects and small lizards, but they'll generally eat a lot more with age. So adult monitors will prey on mice, many other small mammals like small marsupials, things like that. Small birds, crustaceans, they'll eat scorpions, large insects, smaller lizard species, amphibians, eggs and carrion. So they've also been known to eat fish as well. They've been congregated around fish kills. So these guys are actually pretty good hunters. They're on that seafood diet. They seafood, they'll eat it pretty much. And they actually seem to be immune to snake venom that would kill and often kill and eat the deadliest snake, or the most venomous snake in the world, which is the inland taipan. And they also will consume smaller species of monitors within their range, including ackies and rock monitors. They've often been found and eaten by these big goannas. And it's actually quite common to see these guys on rock piles trying to flush out like any little things and things like that. And they lay their eggs in like termite mounds to protect them from their harsh desert climate. So termites often have a much more climate-controlled mound where they live in, so because they often will have that climate control, so that's why they lay their eggs in them, so it's a lot more stable in terms of environment, rather than putting them out in the desert where the temperatures can vary widely. And like goannas and snakes, sand monitors and most other monitors will have forked tongues, which they use to smell the air, and the scents are picked up on each side of the fork, so they'll stick their tongue out. One side may have slightly more food particles or slightly more particles on that side, and then they move towards that side. And then they bring it into their mouth, and they are able to identify which side is stronger, so that means where they go. And upon identifying the difference in scent strength, the sand monitor actually alters direction. And actually, to a recent study, 2021, they showed that during the Miocene, so that was about 20 to about 5 million years ago, Komodo dragons actually hybridized with the ancestors of modern sand monitors or sand goannas, and that provides even more evidence that Komodo dragons were originally from Australia before going extinct there. So that's quite interesting. Really, really interesting animals. We love our sanguanas. So again, wonderful mod done by Leaf and Scott. We didn't get a chance to look at the baby. We'll have a look at the cute little baby. Look at this little cutie. He's a little friend, little goober. Definitely do like the patterns on these guys. Came out excellently. Really, really big fan. So yeah, Leaf and Scott done a wonderful job. Next up, we have got the grey-crowned crane. A really cool animal that we get to talk about. That's got a bit of an update. This one was done by Jen Leaf and Narwhaler. It got a bit of an update from Narwhaler since last time we covered it. So, the grey crowned crane, which is also known as like the African crowned crane, the golden crowned crane, it's got all sorts of different names. These guys are a type of crane in the family Guridae, and they're found in eastern and southern Africa, and are the national bird of Uganda, which is quite interesting. So these guys are also closely related to the black crown crane, and the two species are sometimes treated the same species, but seems like most authorities treat them as separate. And in terms of description, these guys get to about a meter or so tall, or about 3'3", and they weigh about 3.5 kilograms. And they have quite a wide wingspan. That's about 2 meters, or about 6'6" or so. And you can see their body plumage is mainly grey, but they do have a range of colors. Like they have this black patch on the very top of their heads. They also have, you can see this brown feathering on their tails there, and their feathers as well, which is quite interesting. And they also, what gives them their crown name is they got this yellow feathered crown on the top of them, which is quite interesting. They also got these white patches on the side of their faces, a little bit of red there, and they've got black legs and a short grey bill, which is quite charismatic for these guys. And you can see their feet are quite large, but actually quite slender, and this is adapted for balance rather than grasping or defense. And the sexes are quite similar, but the males tend to be slightly larger, and younger birds tend to be more greyish than adults, with a feathered buff face as well. And these guys are the only cranes known that can roost in trees, and that's because they have a long hind limb that allows them to kind of grasp branches. And this seems to be an ancestral trait to cranes, and a lot of the other families of cranes have lost this over time, probably because they didn't really need to. But these guys kind of kept that. And they also have a coiled trachea and loose plumage compared to other cranes, so they're quite different, which is quite interesting. So in terms of their habitat, these guys live across the dry savannas of sub-Saharan Africa, though they often will nest in wetter habitats. Let's have a look at another one while we're... let's see if we can find a male. There we are. There's a male. Yeah, they often live in these habitats. So it's going to be found in marshlands, cultivated lands, grassy flatlands, and near rivers and lakes, also in Uganda and Kenya, and also be found as far south as South Africa. They don't really have set migratory patterns, but they tend to be sedentary near the tropics. And birds in more arid areas such as Namibia, they'll often move around more locally to obviously find the best spots. In terms of behavior, these guys have a breeding behavior that kind of involves dancing, bowing, and jumping. They also have a booming call that comes from that gula sac that you can see under their neck, where they produce these booming calls. They also can make honking sounds. That sounds quite different than other cranes' kind of trumpetings. And both sexes will dance, and immature birds will actually join the adults sometimes. And during an integral part of courtship, that they may be dancing is quite important, but they'll often do it any time throughout the year. And there's flocks of up to 150 birds, and actually not that uncommon. In terms of feeding, these guys will eat plants, seeds, grains, insects, foods, worms, snakes, small fish, and the eggs of aquatic animals, so quite generalist in that regard. And they'll stamp their feet as they walk, which will flush out insects, and they'll quickly catch them. And these birds will also associate with large grazing herbivores, such as elephants, rhinos, buffaloes, hippos, things like that, and even like gazelles and things like that. And they'll often grab prey items disturbed by these animals. And they spend their entire day looking for food, and they spend their time in the trees at night resting and sleeping, which is quite interesting. So now we get to talk about the little babies. That little baby swimming around, we're not going to talk about him. We'll have a look at you, your little friend. So these guys time their breeding seasons with the rains, so that often can vary geographically. So in East Africa, they'll breed year-round, but in Southern Africa, they'll breed with in the wet season. And during the breeding season, these guys will construct quite a large nest. with a platform of grasses and other plants in these wetland vegetation, which is quite interesting. In terms of their clutches, they lay 2 to 5 eggs that are quite glossy and dirty white, and they're incubated by both the male and the female for about 28 to 31 days. And the chicks are born what is called precocial. They're pretty much they're able to go right after a hatching. They're able to run out and find food for themselves, things like that. And they can run around soon after they hatch and fledge at about 100 days or 56 to 100 days. And then once they're fully grown, they can become independent. And actually, chicks of different sexes will separate from their parents and start a family. And grey-crowned cranes have actually been seen to congregate in large numbers in a ceremony akin to a wedding where two young chicks are married off, which is quite interesting. And the new couple will dance for a while before flying off together, and then they'll start a new family, which is quite interesting. But in terms of their relations to humans, they are an endangered species, which sucks, and we'll explain why. They remain common over parts of their range, though they face a lot of threats, including drainage of their habitats, pollution or overgrazing as well. That's a big issue, especially like for agriculture, and pesticide pollution. And the global population estimated to be about 58,000 to about 77,000. And 2012 was uplisted from vulnerable to endangered by the IUCN, so there's a little bit more worry. They're thinking, oh, they're declining. There might be some more help needed with these guys. But luckily, they are kind of considered important culture. They're the national bird of Uganda, and they feature on the coats of arms and the flag of Uganda. And they're often seen in some movies, such as Paul Blart 2, Mall Cop 2, Mr. Bean, and also Debbie Does Dallas. They're in a few movies, because they are quite a beautiful species. And really, really awesome. So this one was done by Jen Lee for Narwhaler. Narwhaler did the most recent update, and I think it looks rather wonderful. So yeah, really, really big fan of this crane. Really, really cool. So next up, we're moving on to some mammals now. We've got another one that's made a comeback. We got by Monsoon and Leaf. We've got a very interesting species, the Asian unicorn, also known as the Saola. So the Saola, also known as the Asian unicorn or the Vukanang bovid, are one of the world's rarest mammals. So they're a forest-dwelling bovid found in the Annamite range of Vietnam and Laos. And they were first described in 1993 following discovery of these guys, the remains in Vukanang National Park, which was a survey done with WWF and the Vietnamese Ministry of Forest, which is quite interesting. So they were first discovered in May 1992. Vietnam, they sent a survey team in that park, and they kind of found the remains. They've also found skulls and things like that. They also came across these skulls and things like that and described this new bovid. And then the scientific name for the Saola is Pseudo-Oryx niatinensis, and it was classified under Bovidae, so they're a type of bovid. And that comes along with genetics as well. They are kind of related in that Bovidae family. And because they're quite basal, it's a quite interesting traits of them. And since they're physical traits, there's some people that have been suggested they're caprines, but they seem to be more basal, kind of their own group, more closer to boviny, which is quite interesting. So more interesting to ancestral bovids, which is quite cool. So things like obviously cows and bison and things like that, which is quite cool. So the species was first reported, and there have been some. The first pictures of a captive Saola was found in 1993, and the most recent image of a Saola was found in 2013, and was found in South Central Vietnam. So, in terms of the description, these guys, they found a female called Martha, and then they measured her and measured her and took notes about her. So she was observed for about 15 days and then died of unknown causes. After that, she was eaten, which is a little bit sad. She was about 84 centimeters or 33 inches tall at the shoulder, with the back being slightly elevated. And she had nearly 12 centimeters shorter than the shoulder height, which is quite interesting. And the head to body length was about 150 centimeters or about 5 feet. And the general characteristics, as you can see there, they've got this chocolate brown coat with these white patches along their faces and throat, and also the sides of the neck, and also kind of one down their rump. And also you can see the black dorsal spikes and spine and things like that, not spikes, stripes, and these large horns, which are present in both sexes. So they also noted they've got quite long straight hair, that's about 1.5 to 2.5 centimeters. And that was quite unusual for an animal of its habitat, and it is associated with mountain habitats, which is quite interesting. And Saolas also have a tail that's about 23 centimeters long, and they have these like horizontal bands going around like that. You can see that there, which is quite interesting. And they also have round pupils and black irises. It's kind of hard to see now when we're in the bad light, but that's also quite interesting. And they have all sorts like a thick flap along their face and things like that, which is quite interesting. And you can see both sexes have these long horns, and they come out almost at the same angle as the skull, but they often different length. And that's kind of where they get their name, the spindle horn. And these general horns get to about like 25 centimeters, divergence of 25 centimeters between the tips. And noted the horns were about 7 centimeters in circumference around the base. And studies prior to claim the horns were kind of like uniformly circular in cross section, but now they seem to have like a oval shape, which is quite interesting. The Saola also has one of the smallest ranges of any land mammal, and they inhabit western evergreen deciduous forests and Southeast Asia. They prefer river valleys. Sightings have been seen from the steep river valleys of about 300 to 1800 meters, or about 9,000 to 1,000 to 500,000 feet. Well, maybe not 500,000, 5,000 feet above sea level. And in Vietnam and Laos, their range actually only covers about 5,000 square kilometers and includes 4 nature reserves. And during the winters, they tend to migrate into the lowlands of the northern Annamite Mountains and can be seen or sighted mostly across near streams, like 592 to 112 meters, or about 2,000 to 3,000 feet, which is quite interesting. In terms of their biology and ecology, local people report these guys are active pretty much throughout the day and night, but they prefer resting during the midday when it's hot. And they also know that the captive female was active mainly during the day, but pointed that observation may have been influenced by her unfamiliar surroundings. And when she rested, she would also draw her forelimbs inwards towards her belly, extend her neck and touch the ground, and close her eyes. And though they thought to be solitary originally, Saola have been reported in groups up to 2 or 3, even up to 6 or 7, and these grouping patterns actually resemble species such as bushbuck, anola, and shitunga, which is quite cool. And these guys also observed that captive female was quite calm in the presence of humans, but was afraid of dogs. And on an encounter with a dog, she would snort and thrust the head forward and like point her horns at the opponent. So obviously a way to defend herself. And this female hardly paid to her kind of surroundings. The female was also found to urinate and defecate separately. So she dropped her hindlimbs and lowered her lower body, which is quite common among bovids. And she would also spend considerable time grooming herself with her tongue and also all sorts of different marking behavior, things like that. So in terms of their diet, they offered all sorts of different foods to these guys, but they seem to feed on all plants, but they like prefer certain ones. She did not pull any leaves. She'd actually chew them and pull them into her mouth using a long tongue. And she fed mainly during the day, but sometimes in the dark. She would, but really. And we often don't actually have that much. Show the baby while we talk about it. We don't have much information about their reproductive cycle, but it suggests that these guys have a fixed mating system from like August to mid-November, with single calves like these guys being documented, mainly during the summer of mid-April to late June. And the absence of more specific data, people have estimated it quite similar to the gestation's quite similar to other like antelope species, other types of bovids, that about 33 weeks. And there's been 3 reports of Saola killings near villages that include young, accompanying mothers. And one possessed like horns that are about 9 centimeters long, and the other estimated 15 centimeters, and then the last one about 18 centimeters. With these varying horn lengths suggest a birthing season that lasts about like 2 to 3 months. And also, these guys are critically endangered. So they're quite restrictive habitat, which is quite close to humans. As I mentioned, they get hunted all the time. Is likely to endanger them, and also things such as habitat loss and habitat fragmentation is a really big thing. They also suffer a lot from local hunting and the illegal trade of like furs and medicines and also bushmeat that is used in restaurants and food markets. And they sometimes get caught in snares that have been set up to catch other animals, such as like wild boars, sandbar, and mujax as things as well. And the key features of the areas they found in is they're quite remote, and they also can be shot for their meat, but it's hunters also gain high esteem in the village for the production of a carcass. So Due to its scarcity, Saolas are kind of considered a much more important or like higher esteem to have a Saola because they're more rare. And the people of the area are often traditional hunters. Their attitude to killing Saola is quite hard to change, which also makes their conservation a little bit more difficult. And the intense entrance of scientific community has actually motivated hunters to catch live specimens for people to study, and also things like commercial logging's been an issue around some of these areas as well. Just being hard to study, things like that. But luckily, there is, and being so rare, it's kind of hard to study them. But there are people like working to protect them, and people trying to research and things like that. So yeah, really, really interesting. These guys may have a more positive future with more research, which is just so mysterious, and that were kind of what makes them so interesting. They're a large animal, but we know so little about them. Yeah, really, really cool animal. Really do love the Saola. So that was another one done by Lee for Monsoon. Gave it a bit of an update and put it on a new rig, which makes it look so much nicer. Definitely a big fan of this guy. So next up, we have got, this one was done by Nicholas Lion Rider, Leaf Gen, and recently updated by Narwhaler. We have got the North American River Otter. So cute little guy here. So this is the North American river otter. So these guys are also known as rivers otters or northern river otters. They are a semi-aquatic mammal that only live in North America, and they live along coasts and waterways. They often can get to about 5 to 14 kilograms or 11 to 30 pounds, and they have quite a thick coat that protects them from the cool weather. So in terms of their description, these guys have these long whiskers that allow them to detect prey in dark waters. The average adult weighs about 11 kilograms, or about 25 pounds. For male and females, about 8 kilograms, or about 18 pounds. And their body length ranges from 66 to 107 centimeters. And about 1/3 of that length is their long tails, you kind of see here, with that tail reaching about 30 to 50 centimeters, or about 12 to 20 inches. And very large male river otters can get to about 15 kilograms. And they're quite different from the Eurasian otter because of their longer neck. They've got the narrow visage, and they have the smaller space between the ears and a shorter tail compared to the Eurasian otter. And males and females really do not have sexual dimorphism other than the males being bigger. They're not like no physical. And North American otters have been known to live about 21 to 25 years in captivity, while about 8 to 13 in the wild. So in terms of these guys, they often can be found within a few feet of a boat or a person. They're near-sighted as well. And most of these guys also have quite interesting canines. They have large molars to break apart mollusks, so clams and things like that, which is quite interesting. In terms of they were first discovered by German naturalist John Christian Daniel von Schubert in 1777, and they had a bunch of common names, but their now name is Lotra canadensis. So they're in a genus that includes like all New World otters, and they suggest that they more closely they split from the giant otter around the like Miocene, so about 23 to 5 million years ago, which was much earlier than indicated fossil record. And we actually do have a giant otter from the Pliocene, but the Pliocene of North America. However, these fossils of the modern river otter did not appear until the Pleistocene. So the New World otters actually originated from the Old World, where they followed a migration across the Bering Land Bridge, which happened between 1.8 million and 10,000 years ago. And it means they likely arrived at a similar time to humans, meaning humans were an important part of the ecosystem the moment otters came in, which is quite interesting. And in terms of these guys, they often will settle in areas with lots of vegetation and coverage and rock piles. In terms of playing, they're quite renowned for their sense of play. They often can be seen wrestling with each other and chasing each other, which is quite cute. But that's quite important as they learn like skills like hunting and foraging from these guys. So let's see if we can find ourselves one that's chillaxing. Look at this cutie. Anyway, in terms of hunting, these guys are quite active predators, and they've been quite adept at hunting like aquatic and semi-aquatic animals. And their vulnerability in seasonal availability of play mainly governs their choices in terms of prey choice, so they pretty much eat what's around. And the diet of these guys can be deduced by looking at samples of poop in the field and things like that. But it seems like it often depends where they live. Often they'll eat a lot of fish and crustaceans where that's regionally available, and that's kind of makes the bulk of their diet. But these guys, as foragers, they'll eat whatever they can find. They'll also eat fruits, reptiles, amphibians, birds. including molting ducks as well, and aquatic insects, other small mammals, and mollusks. And the North American river otter are not scavengers, and they avoid eating carrion, but they will typically eat whatever they can get their mouths around. Though they have been observed killing things as large as adult common snapping turtles together, which is quite interesting when they are hibernating. And remains of a much larger North American badger have been found in North American river otter scat. So it seems like these guys may have potentially like joined together to hunt a beaver or just scavenged on a beaver. So that's quite interesting. And these guys are also quite important for the ecology. They're a kind of top predator within their ecosystems. So these guys will control the numbers of many other smaller species. And if those guys aren't there, those species will get out of control and hurt the ecosystem, which is quite a common thing in ecology. Often these top predators are really important in regulating populations of many other animals lower in the food web. In terms of their social behavior, these guys live and disperse in like family groups. More often, the males will often go off and do their own thing more than females. And when females leave, they tend to be move more further away than males, which can be up to like 90 kilometers away. Male North American otters do not seem to be territorial, and newly dispersing males may join like other male groups, which is quite interesting. In terms of their reproduction, these guys have delayed implantation, which is actually something these guys have and Eurasian river otters don't, which is quite cool. And in early spring, typically an expectant mother, let's see if we can find a baby. I think this is a little baby, little cutie. So these little babies are typically born in a den where the mother can give birth, and the female otter will often rely on other animals to dig these dens, such as beavers. And when mothers have established this, they'll give birth to these several little kits. And litter size can reach 5, but they usually range between 1 to 3. And each pup born is about 5 ounces. And typically the mother will raise these babies without the aid of adult males. And the pups are about 2 months old and their coat will grow in. The mother will introduce them to water, where these guys are often natural swimmers, but they'll often, their mother will hang around and then teach them to kind of swim a little bit. And they may leave the den by 8 weeks and are capable of sustaining themselves until the arrival of fall. And usually they will stay with their families, which sometimes actually includes their father, until the following spring. So prior to the arrival of the next litter, the North American river otter will often venture out and find its kind of search of their own home range. So in terms of their ecology, these guys, or like geographical range, they're found pretty much throughout North America. They can be found in Canada, Pacific Northwest, Gulf of Mexico, and things like that. They often live in coastal regions around that area, such as the Pacific coast. They can be found on the Aleutian Islands as well. And but also these guys, their ranges has reduced quite a bit due to urbanization. So they are now absent or rare in places such as Arizona, Kansas, New Mexico, Ohio, South Dakota, Tennessee, things like that, with some reintroduction projects trying to bring them back into some of those areas, which is quite interesting. And since they've been reintroduced into Kentucky in the early 90s, they've recovered and things like that in a lot of areas. There's lots of efforts to bring them into areas where they once were. And it seems like historically they used to live in, they're once populous throughout most drainage across the United States and Canada. And the largest river otter populations are found in areas with abundance of diversity in aquatic habitats. So like the coastal marches or the Great Lakes, or the glaciated areas across New England, that they're typically like riverine habitats and things like that. They pretty much found anywhere near water that is like in the deep depths of the ocean, pretty much. So in terms of their, as I mentioned, their habitat, these guys are river otters, so they live in lakes, streams, marshlands, things like that. They eat mostly frogs and fish, but they'll often eat small mammals as well. They've been known to hunt in pairs. Kind of went through that before. I don't know what's going through it again. But the threats that these guys face, they often can be ambushed and eaten by polar and grizzly bears, and they've actually been witnessed near the Arctic region. And threats to these guys actually vary quite a bit, as I mentioned, these local extinctions. It often depends on settlement, so people like draining a lot of aquatic habitats to make farmland, or development of coal and timber and things like that has caused lots of local extinctions. But overall, I think they're doing okay. They are considered least concern. Yep, they are considered least concern. Though there has been some local extinctions, of course. And that's caused declines throughout like the 1980s. These guys were considered extinct in 11 states. And after the 1970s, there's been lots of improvements in land management and Increased concerns about the population declines of river otters in America often led to reintroduction projects across the areas where they are, which is quite cool. So luckily, they are actually doing a little bit better. People are wanting to introduce them into new places. So they weren't really endangered in the 1970s, but they're a great conservation story because people are like, we like these otters, we want them in more areas. So they've actually started more reproduction projects and things like that to help these guys, which is really, really cool. So, in terms of more localized threats to these guys, pollution as well, acid damage from coral mines, oil spills have eliminated their prey, which in turn hurt the otters. And urbanization is really decreased because it's hard to be an otter and get through a city to get to another water source. So, often that can be a barrier to them spreading out. But yeah, in terms of their conservation, though, they have been eliminated through many parts of their range, especially where there's places like the Midwest and Eastern United States. They're not threatened with extinction, but they are kind of a species of least concern. And the people are trying to reintroduce them to parts of their range. They have declined, but improvements in water quality and less hunting and things like that, and reintroduction projects has really helped their populations come back and reestablish themselves in a lot of areas where they went extinct. So yeah, really, really cool. Nice conservation story. You can see the really awesome North American river otter and how wonderful it's been updated by Narwhaler. So really, really cool. So next up, we've got by Havoc, Gaboy, Mega Game and Rex, and Phonetic. We have got another leopard. We have got here the Persian leopard. Let me just cough. Okay, so we've got the Persian leopard, which is a subspecies of leopard that is typically found in the Iranian plateau. So they can be found around Turkey, the Caucasus, Georgia, Iran, Azerbaijan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Iran, places like that, and potentially even Pakistan. So they're also known as the Anatolian leopard or the Caucasian leopard. There's another few other names for these guys. And the estimated population, these guys are estimated to be endangered, and their wild population is less than 1,000 mature individuals. So in terms of their phylogeny, these guys have often been considered, like even sometimes species, but they're now considered a subspecies. In 2017, they were called Pandarus turlanai, I believe you say that, which is the oldest available name for this leopard subspecies. And it seems that these guys kind of belong to a monophyletic group that diverged from Africa and the Arabian leopard, which is a kind of second half of the Pleistocene. So these guys seem to be a little bit of a different gene pool and different clade, which is quite interesting. So they're more closely related to your African leopards than Asian leopards. So in terms of their anatomy, you can see they're grayish with like a slightly reddish fur with these large rosettes, very similar to other leopards along their flanks and things like that. They vary in coloration, with both pale and dark individuals existing in Iran. And the average body length is about 158 centimeters or 62 inches, with a 192 millimeter or 76-inch skull and a 94 centimeter or 37-inch tail, and can weigh up to about 60 kilograms. But some particularly large individuals have been found with like an average body length of about 102 inches, and a young male actually weighed 64 kilograms from the Caucasus, which is quite interesting. In terms of their distribution and habitat, these guys are found in the Greater Caucasus and like subalpine meadows, broadleaf and mixed forests as well, up to about 12,000 feet up into the Caucasus, which is quite interesting. In northern Anatolia, these guys have been found in like upper alpine zones, so quite varied in terms of their habitats, which is quite interesting. And they've been sighted pretty much all around these areas, like the Asar rivers and the Zangur mountains as well. Also been sighted in northern Iran, but Iran is considered kind of the stronghold for the leopards, and there's like they have been recorded in a lot of protected areas, with the Caspian Iraqian mountains being the most important habitat for leopards. And most of these leopards in these habitats live at temperatures of about 13 to 18 degrees Celsius, with a maximum of 20 days of ice cover per year, which is quite interesting. And in northern Iran, there's 4 leopard families with 2 cubs identified in a survey between 2005 and 2008, with the male leopard being found in 2008, and I believe one individual was also found in 2011. But although their range is so restricted now, they used to have much bigger range. So during the Roman Empire, they were found in the Taurus Mountains in Turkey. They were also found in Syria. But even recently, several factors have caused these leopards to decline. Even in the 1990s, there have been sightings in Fiklay and also other places like that. Due to deforestation and conversion of their habitat to orchards, and also people killing these leopards to protect their livestock, that caused their populations decline. And also trophy hunting was a big factor of the decline of the Antarctic leopard in the 1950s. So one hunter actually killed 15 leopards between 1930 and 1950, and was considered locally extinct in western Turkey by the mid 1970s. Though the leopard population in southern Russia was restricted by the 1950s, as believed by 2007 there were less than 50 in this region. But since then, they're thought to be extirpated from Georgia, and the Soviet Union also caused the economic crisis that weakened the protections around these guys, so they declined with that. But also survive in Azerbaijan in low numbers. So they're kind of a species. It's subspecies. It's a little bit threatened by poaching and agriculture and things like that, and just declined quite a bit. So, in terms of their diet, these guys will feed on a lot of different animals depending on the habitat. They've been known in Iran and Armenia. They've been seen of hunting mouflons, wild goats, wild boars, roe deer, porcupines, and hares. Though they'll occasionally attack livestock and herding dogs, they often will avoid that. They've also been seen hunting ognars, which is quite interesting. And in Turkey, they'll also prey on chamois. Typically, adult males will usually share their home range with about 2 to 3 females, and the mating season will last from January to mid-February. Well, we'll talk about that. Let's talk about the babies. Let's have a look at little babies. Here's a cute little baby. And in the Sagori National Park, 3 females were actually documented in late April to May 2008 with 1 or 2 cubs each. So that shows they're breeding, doing quite well. But as I mentioned, they're threatened a lot by poaching, depletion of prey due to hunting, deforestation, agriculture, overgrazing, infrastructure development. So there's a lot of threats, and poisoning's been a big thing for these guys. But in terms of conservation, the strongest population is in Iran with about 550 to 850 leopards, according to 2008. But it's believed most recent there's fewer than 1,000 in the wild because of declining things like that. But luckily they are strictly protected, and there's conservation programs trying to reintroduce these guys into areas of the Caucasus to help become an umbrella species. So protecting habitat for leopards can help protect many other species, having that more wholesome ecosystem approach. They're also trying to work on corridors, so populations of leopards can move around and spread their genes so they don't become inbred. And in certain national parks, they're working on wildlife corridors to allow them to move around and find each other. And also some reintroduction projects have been on the way as well. And there's about 100 or so in captivity, so in zoos around the world. And the European Endangered Species Program actually sustains kind of a quote-unquote backup population in captivity for them. And in 2015, these guys have often been representations of these leopards have been found in ancient kind of Neolithic agricultural sites, and people believe to worship them. There also seemed to be a stuffed animal that was killed on the island of Greece in 1862, which was kind of a leopard as well. But they think its coat was rather natural for a leopard and may have been altered, but that's quite interesting. So, yeah, quite an interesting animal, very important for the cultures of those areas, and yeah, quite cool. Hopefully their conservation goes a little bit better. But, yeah, very cool animal. So next up, we've got last but most certainly not least, we have got a new animal today. This is the Antarctic fur seal done by Gaboy and Genora Pizza. So let's have a wonderful look. We'll have a look at the big male sitting here. Lovely lad. So the Antarctic fur seal, or Arctophalus gazella, I believe you say that. So these guys are one of the 8 species in the group Arctophalus and one of the 9 fur seals in the subfamily Antarctophilidae. And despite what its name suggests, these guys are mostly found in subantarctic regions, and the scientific name is thought from the German vessel SMS Gazelle, which was first to collect specimens of Antarctic fur seals from the Kelugan Islands, which is quite interesting. So as I mentioned, these guys are from the genus Antarctophallus, which was also may reassign this genus to a resurrected genus Arctophoca, which seems to be quite cool as well. They often can be confused with other closely related species, such as the subantarctic fur seal or the New Zealand fur seal, things like even sea lions. But genetic structure so that there's kind of 2 distinct populations, which is a western one that is found in the Scotia Arc, Marion, and Bolivet Islands, with an eastern region population kind of found in Cologan and the Macquarie Islands. But species, seals from the Corzette and Heard Islands are kind of a mixture. So there's kind of two different genetic populations, and then there's one in the middle that mixes of both. So in terms of these guys' description, these guys are about a mid-sized pinniped. So they've got a relatively long nose, you kind of see there, and a pointed muzzle compared with other fur seals. And their nose don't extend much past their mouth, and they have external ears that are quite long and prominent. And they have these very long labrissurae, or which is kind of long whiskers, and they can get up to about 35 to 50 centimeters long in males. And you can see they've got quite a long foreflipper, as you kind of can't see if he's kind of walking there. Large fur flippers that account for 1/3 of their body, and the hind flip is about 1/4 of their total length. As you can see, adult males are quite dark in color, or dark brown. Females and juveniles tend to be quite a bit paler. We'll have a look at a female over here. So you can see the females are typically a little bit paler. And color patterns seem to be highly variable. And that could also be because of some hybridization between subantarctic and Arctic fur seals. And we can have a look at these cute little pups. These cute little pups you see quite dark in color, dark brown at birth, almost black at birth, though there are some leucistic or kind of white individuals. So in terms of their size, these guys can get quite big. So males are substantially larger than females. Males get up to about 2 meters long and have a mean weight of about 133 kilograms, or just under 300 pounds. Females reach about 1.4 meters with a mean weight of 34 kilograms, so about 4 foot long, 4.5 feet long, and about 70 pounds. And at birth, they're typically about 67 centimeters, or about 66 inches or so, and weigh about 6 kilograms, or about 4 to 6 pounds for males, at about 5.4 kilograms, or 4.8 to 5.9 for females. And typically these guys are about 20 years or so in the wild, but a maximum observation for a female was about 24. So these guys are also considered least concern. They're believed to be the most abundant species of fur seal. The largest congregation of these islands is in South Georgia, and that has about 95% of the global population. The current best estimate of the South Georgia population is between 4.5 and 6.2 million animals, with the next largest population, the Bovet Islands, about 46,834 individuals. However, there are some regional differences in population trends, with some increasing. So the Cologan and the McDonald Islands, the colonies are getting bigger. Some populations are stable, such as the Macquarie Islands and Heard Islands, and the Bovet Islands population seems to be decreasing. So these guys, as I mentioned, they have circumpolar population, so they kind of breed alongside that area. So breeding colonies can be found from South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, all across around Marion Island, the Cologan and Heard Islands, and then up to the Southern Pacific, where they can be found breeding on the Southern Pacific Islands, such as Macquarie Island. And during winter, they can also be seen around the Falkland Islands in southern Argentina, which is quite interesting. These guys are also quite well studied compared to a lot of Southern Ocean predators. The vast majority of their information comes from the breeding months. So these guys are polygamous, with a dominant male mating with as many as 20 females. And males will establish breeding grounds in October to early November, with females generally reach these colonies in December, and they'll give birth to a single pup several days later. Gestation will last about 8 to 9 months, and has observed to have a high breeding secrecy within these range. So approximately 90% of babies born are within a 10-day window, which is quite interesting. And juveniles also spend several years at the sea before returning to begin their breeding cycle. So they spend a couple of years doing their own thing. The ecology of these guys is during the non-breeding winters quite understood. Not well understood, I mean. Adults and subadult males may form groups while molting along the Antarctic Peninsula during late summer and early autumn. Also, adult females are gregarious, but relatively asocial, other than strong bonds established with their pups. And they have occasional aggressive encounters with nearby females and other pups, and brief interactions without males. And these seals appear to be solitary when they're foraging and migrating and things like that. The usual food source for these guys in the Antarctic region, it says Atlantic region on Wikipedia, that's wrong. They feed on Antarctic krill, while on the Indian Ocean they'll feed lots of fish and squid. They'll also prey on ice fish, mycopods, skates and rays as well. They'll also occasionally eat penguins and things like that. And seasonal differences of their diets have been seen across colonies, also seasons and years, so there's a lot of variation. It also shows that female Arctic fur seals will often undertake a large, wide-ranging foraging migration throughout the year. And interannual differences seem to be during like different oceanic conditions, things like that. So as I mentioned, their diet is typically fish, krill, and squid, with penguins occasionally found in their diet. And nursing mothers around South Georgia are typically quite dependent on krill during the breeding season, and therefore the availability of krill is important for their reproductive success. And the colonies around the Macquarie Islands and Kalugan Islands actually more often eat fish and squid, and these guys will dive at night to feed. So in terms of threats to these guys, historically these guys were hunted a lot for their fur during sealing industry and were actually quite closely driven to extinction. But since sealing kind of has ended around the early 20th century, their populations have recovered at differing rates. So waters inhabiting these guys are exploited by few fisheries, but maybe with climate change, more fisheries will come in, and that could be an impact to these guys. There's also things like man-made debris, like fishing lines, nets, and anything that can like choke them has been found on these guys as a big issue. Also, trawling has been affecting the prey of these guys, which obviously goes up the ecosystem and affects these guys, affects where they forage, things like that. In terms of predation, these guys are preyed upon by leopard seals, especially pups around the South Shetland Island. This level of predation has may have caused some population declines in some sites. And as well as hunting and fishing, the number of humans visiting the subantarctic islands for tourism and science has often risen. And this includes greater interaction with humans and local animals, which can actually affect breeding seasons and also injuries. As even there was a man bitten by a seal on the South Georgia Islands by British forces, which is quite interesting, was rescued. And due to the remote location, it's actually quite hard to get a person that with the experience to treat an exotic animal bite. And this also is compounded by their fur seal behavior and how serious their bites can be because they eat a lot of fish that can impact a lot their behavior and things like that. But also, the big genetic bottleneck of the 19th century has actually reduced their genetic diversity, which actually led them more vulnerable to diseases and the stresses of climate change, which is obviously going to affect these guys. And also their prey, such as krill, has also been reduced as part of ocean acidification and disruption. Also things like that can be caused by climate change. So for the most part, they're doing okay. There's millions of them that can least concerned, but there's big issues happening in the Arctic that's affecting the animals they feed on, which in turn will affect them. Yeah, in terms of their conservation status, I mentioned they're least concern. They're protected in where they can be found, like in Australia, South Africa, France, and they're protected for the most part, which is really, really cool. But a really, really awesome animal to get a model. Let's see, it'd be cute there. So, yeah, again, done by Gaboy and Genora Pizza. Gaboy always does wonderful jobs with his mods. I always love Gaboy mods. They always come out rather wonderful. And it's nice to see him do a seal. It's got my seal of approval. Really, really awesome. So, yeah, I think I'm going to finish that up. No, we'll have a look at the baby. Look at this cute little baby. Look at how cute he is. Oh my gosh, he's so adorable. We love our little baby seals. So yeah, really, really awesome mod showcase today. We've got to see some really interesting species. So, yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified of uploading anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.